Forbes India, Influencers of Change, in partnership with UiPath.
India's unicorn landscape has expanded significantly with a raft of new entrants entering the wanted billion-dollar club. Now, the first 40 days of this year, in fact, has seen 8 new names being added to the overall tally of 83. But pushing the envelope when it comes to growth and scale necessitates an enterprise to have the right technology framework in place, whether we speak of large and established businesses in traditional industries or digital natives angling to carve a niche for themselves. After all, it's not just about maximizing operational efficiency to improve profits. These are the times of creating unique customer experiences and rich employee experiences to stay ahead of the competition. And it is here that properly strategizing for automation could play an important role. On this fifth and final conversation of our special presentation titled Forbes India Influencers of Change in partnership with UiPath, we will be speaking to leaders of this new digital paradigm and understand the nuances when it comes to embracing the automation path for growth. I'm your host, Gautam Srinivasan, and joining me on this conversation are Karthik Rajaram, Senior Director and Country Head for the India business at Freshworks, Vishal Chaudhary, co-founder at Zed Work, Sulaiman Alam, Chief Digital and Strategy Officer at Grameen Phone, Scott Hunter, VP Customer Strategy and Solutions at UiPath, and Rick Harshman, SVP and MD for Asia Pacific and Japan at UiPath as well. Thank you everyone for joining us on this talk to explore the power of digitization and automation in driving growth for the next generation of enterprises. So let's start by outlining a blueprint of how each of you sees the role of automation in growth and transformation strategy of a company, and in the charter for your role as a C-suite executive or founder of a digital business. Vishal, let's start with you.
Yeah, I'll just briefly tell about what Zed Work does. So Zed Work manages helps customers manage their large and complex supply chains, manufacturing supply chains across India and across the world. And if I just talk about India specifically, where there are more than about 50 million MSMEs working in the country, small manufacturers spread across the large country that we have. But technology today has the potential of playing a very transformative role, because if you look at a typical MSME in a country, they are not too deep into technology, and pre-COVID era, most of the work was very offline-ish. But today, with the kind of spurt in growth that most of them are seeing and expanding beyond the native geographies in which they have been working, technology truly has a very, very transformative role, and that's where we have a very key role to play as a company.
All right, indeed. It's a new normal, and of course, the use of technology. Well, many new applications have come about, and it's just we're just scratching the surface, and there are many more applications to come in. The first salvo fired from Vishal. Karthik, your thoughts on this, on the basic role of automation in a company's growth journey?
Thanks. Thank you, Gautam. Right. So my team and I have been incredibly fortunate to have had front row seats into the kind of transformation that has happened, especially in the last 2 years, right? The innovation, the creativity, and the resilience in the face of adversity has been awe-inspiring, right? And when we looked at some of the leading indicators of success, right, there are some organizations that do it really well than others. And when we looked at certain underlying themes, what we saw was there was incredible clarity of vision when it comes to determining the why, how, and the what, right? And in all of these organizations, the leadership walks the walk and talks the talk, right? It is about how they drive the culture, how they change their org design, how they look at rewarding the right kind of behavior, right? And they obsess about employee and customer experience. I'm sure we're going to be talking about it in greater detail during the course of this conversation. And last but not the least, they think scale, right? Because they have big, hairy, audacious goals, and they're always thinking scale. And that's where they're thinking of automation in a very thoughtful and deliberate manner, not in terms of replacement, but in terms of augmentation and efficiencies.
All right. In this era of thinking about scale, big scale, it's that vision which drives the mission of how, what, and why. Let's get a multinational perspective on this question of the role of technology and automation in a company's growth journey. So, Leman, your thoughts on this? Bangladesh, a very interesting, very high growth market right now. So, where does technology fit in that blueprint?
Okay. So first of all, thank you, and let me come at it from maybe, let's say, Grameenphone angle first. That would be maybe easier for all of you to relate, since it's a technology company in itself, and then also talk a bit about the social and economic perspective here. So you see, for a company like us, and we've been in this operation or in this market for the last 25 years, and almost 50% plus market share. So this basically entails that that a lot of the things that we, let's say, bring to the market kind of sets trends. And one thing I will tell you, and I'm sure all of my colleagues who are participating here would also resonate, that for any business, be it established or just starting out or at whatever stage of their life cycle, it is extremely important. And the first thing that we always start is we start from the customers, right? And technology and automation is not something that is an inside out need, but it is actually a need from the customers. Instantaneity is something that the customers these days demand. They want everything right here, right now, and simplest of simple ways. And with any established process of serving the customers, it is not possible to do this without technology and automation. So herein actually comes the, let's say, societal and the technology perspective I'll also bring. I mean, if you look at our market, penetration, real mobile penetration would be in the early 60s. Smartphone penetration is just in the early 40s. So you see, the development that we are seeing in digitization and in terms of technology adoption, we are at the cusp of, let's say, just riding the S. So in that way, it's a very exciting time to be, and I do believe that technology and automation is playing a pivotal role in fast forwarding this.
Absolutely. Technology in service of outcome. And one of the most important outcomes is, of course, happy customers. So good to see that technology is becoming more outcome focused and seeing to it that it's not just for a namesake or whether others are doing it. You're doing it for your business and you're using it in a way that it makes your customers, your employees, your vendors, the entire ecosystem work better, and of course improve expectations as growth scales up exponentially. All right, that's the first point coming in from the companies. Let's get the enablers in for their perspectives. Scott, your thoughts on this, especially from a solutions ecosystem. When we look at the role of automation in growth, how has the solutions ecosystem expanded?
What I typically do when I talk to C-suite executives, I go in and I look at their vision. Where are they trying to go? Where they have to go? And then the next kind of area I look at is the strategy. How are they going to get there? It's always important to understand the how portion of that journey. Then we get into the business processes. Which business processes are they actually trying to automate to get to automation at scale? And it's the right selection of the processes, and we'll kind of get to that in a minute. And then we look at the KPIs, the key performance indicators for those processes. What are we trying to measure? And then what are we trying to drive to? The enabling technology, which is different from a digital native versus an industry or a customer that's actually been in business for 25 years or so. And then finally, we get to the value. There's 4 different types of value that I focus on. There's tangible value that I can compute that drops to the bottom line. That's typically in supply chain or procurement or manufacturing, and I can actually compute it and it drops through. There's intangible value that has to do with governance, risk, and compliance. And this is often also associated with ESG, which is the environmental, social governance type of recording that we look at. We have a total cost of ownership, which is primarily a discussion I have with the CIO, which is how much does it cost to run my IT portfolio? And then we have strategic value that's very much aligned with the digital natives and with any kind of merger and acquisition type of discussions. But you need to have all of these aligned in a pyramid in order to drive automation at scale. And this is where we need to actually take the dialogue forward with the C-staff.
All right, I'm sure you and Vishal would have lots of interesting things to talk about when it comes to the role of technology in improving the manufacturing supply chain, and we'll get to that. But before that, let me come to you, Rick. From a broader market perspective, you're very experienced in the APAC market. What's the narrative coming out, especially when it comes to the role of automation in this era of hyper growth for companies?
Yeah, I mean, and it's great to see everyone again. So thanks for having us. Just to quickly build on what Scott was saying, I think also the other thing to think about for the digital natives, and we've both been blessed to work closely with digital natives over the last decade, and especially in India. The other thing that has to be taken into consideration is cash burn, as well as finite resources, and it's a very competitive market as well. And I'm sure these gentlemen have a number of stories of where not only is it a competitive market for resources, but they're limited, and their investors are looking at how are you optimizing where you're spending your resources. And so I think automation can play a part there, as well as around customer experience. If I broaden that up across APJ, and also globally, one of the things that we're seeing, and if the pandemic has taught us anything, is the importance of maintaining this operational continuity without manual handoffs. And this is something that, digital transformation was something that every organization that I was talking to with Scott pre-pandemic, everyone was talking about digital transformation. But where the rubber meets the road and where automation comes in is, the importance of maintaining that operational continuity without having to have all of this manual intervention. And that's something that companies didn't necessarily always think about. So this is much more top of mind. And even traditional businesses that may not have thought about it before, the pandemic especially has accelerated their technology adoption. And it's further accelerated automation as a boardroom priority. Every single board that we talk to in C-level, automation is one of the top 3 priorities that they talk about. And how can we help not only provide benefit on the back end, but how can we provide benefit for customer experience? And that's across every market that UiPath works in across APJ. And we're very blessed and fortunate to be a part of that.
All right, automation emerging as a key narrative in the C-suite, a new trend. And of course, automation and its important role now emerging in business continuity management. But taking a cue from what Rick said, let's hear the automation growth journeys of the 3 speakers that we have with us here and the 3 companies that they represent. Karthik, we'll start with you and try to understand from you, how can new technologies like automation and AI help streamline and accelerate the hyper growth journey of a company like yours that has such a successful listing on NASDAQ just a few months ago. Tell us from the lens of the Freshworks story on becoming a leading provider of modern SaaS solutions that, say, solves multiple complex business problems to companies of all sizes, with customers, I believe, numbering over 50,000 across the globe.
Right.
Went IPO on NASDAQ, collected over $1 billion funds at a $13 billion valuation. So taking cue of your story, your growth story, give us a few lessons in excellence.
Gautam, thank you so much. And you seem to pitch Freshworks a lot better than I do. Thank you for that. But having said that, I think it all starts with the customer, right? We obsess about customer and employee experience. And the fact of the matter is that we have solutions that delight our customers, employees, and customers, right? So it all starts off with leadership having a vision to design customer experience, putting the customer front and center, right? Everything stems from that, right? And having very tangible, measurable, and instrumentable initiatives that we drive in a very thoughtful and deliberate way that is helping us drive some of the outcomes, right? And you talked about unicorns and Freshworks today. We work with almost 75% of India's unicorns, right? And we see the need for agility that trumps everything. They want to move really fast, and they expect their partners and vendors to keep up. And talking to them, engaging with them, having a very clear strategy and plan of execution has helped us evolve both from our product standpoint and ensuring that we have the right kind of feedback mechanisms and loops in place to give back to product, to evolve our product. That has helped us in really accelerating our product offerings, our innovation, and our agility as well.
All right. Do you see automation as the key for that agility as well, Karthik?
Absolutely,
Since you
yes.
are in the business of providing solutions to others as
That's
well.
right. That's right. No, absolutely, yes. Because, like I said, these guys think scale, right? And they are exploding. 2 rounds of funding, they get to a unicorn status, and their headcount explodes, right? And they're also simultaneously thinking about efficiencies. I mean, you can't just throw people at problems. They want to do it in a very thoughtful manner. That's where the concept of efficiency, having automation to complement and augment some of what they want to accomplish is coming in. And the important thing is, what's very heartening to see is all of the CX leaders that I talk to on a regular basis are very, very empathetic to the growth of people in their organizations. They want to do it in a very thoughtful, empathetic manner. They are very, very mindful of the kind of charter that they have for the people strategy in their organizations, and they marry that to the scale strategy, right? So that is coming out, and that is helping them in good stead.
All right, dials back to what Scott said, whereby automation is kind of providing that bridge for companies from where they are to where they need to go. All right, from Freshworks, let's hear the Zed Work experience. Vishal, how do organizations leverage new age technologies like automation and AI to scale up when they go from being startups to unicorns and beyond? I want to hear, the Zed Work experience while building a profitable B2B marketplace for custom manufacturing that has enabled it to enter that coveted $1 billion valuation club in just 3 years.
Yeah, so technology had a very, very important role to play where we are and in what we do today. And the way we look at technology, we have got very 2 distinct stakeholders that for whom we try to solve problems. One is the whole customer side, customers, large Indian customers, multinational companies based in US and some of the other geographies. And of course, the other important stakeholder is our wide network of manufacturers / supply chain solution providers in the country. Now, on the customer side, like somebody was mentioning earlier on the call, that the whole transition from manual handoffs at every toll gate to now doing everything digitally or remotely. We have seen, today we have customers sitting in US. Pre-pandemic, it was very easy to throw people behind problem, have somebody in Dubai, have somebody in Colombo, and, take care of the entire supply chain, have people in India take care of manufacturing. But since business did go on during the course of 2.5 years of this pandemic, people have realized that it's possible to do it in a very remote manner and yet have the similar levels of efficiency as was being seen earlier. So on the customer side, we built a lot of tools which have helped customers scale their supply chain. So from just sourcing from 1 or 2 geographies, they have been able to go beyond 1-2 geographies to multiple geographies, just because today they have the power to open their laptop and see the exact status of their manufacturing or the exact status of their consignment, or where exactly that container is, and if it has landed at the final port of discharge, etc. It gives them complete visibility. That's the technology that we have built.
All right. So, Vishal, when we look at this base of, say, manufacturing partners that you work with, do you see high value opportunities being enabled by, say, automation? Because as you say, they're legacy players. For them to come on board and improve what they are doing, I sense automation could go a long way in helping you help them become much more robust players.
No, absolutely. In general, the behavior towards adopting some of these digital tools, even I was surprised looking at the kind of adoption we have for variety of products that we have today, and not just Zed Work. Some of our manufacturers work with other companies as well. So generally, they are far more adept to using newer technologies. May not be the ones only made by Zed Work, even made by others. For example, a simple thing like generating GST invoices. I get a lot of emails, talk to a lot of suppliers. They've been using a bunch of other platforms which have been made. And, remember, this was being done on Tally till 2 years back. So, and this is not a very push kind of a thing. I mean, they have naturally in their circles spoken to others and far more adept to adopting some of these new things, new products coming in the market. Which is definitely improve their
That is the
customers.
key point, that the applications are wide ranging. It's not limited to a specific function. It can be finance, it can be operations, it can be strategy, planning. We're seeing a wide variety of use cases emerge, which hopefully, as Rick had mentioned, it's percolating into the C-suite, considering you have successful use cases emerging, and therefore it builds on adding more investment in automation to make sure that everything's working perfectly and you get to where you need to be. All right, coming to you, Suleiman, staying ahead in this highly competitive market, the telecom market, is as challenging as getting there. So from Grameen Phone's experience of being ahead of the curve for over 2 decades in Bangladesh's telecom industry, what lessons would you share from your journey of adopting automation?
To be frank and to be honest, automation I don't think is a 2 decades journey, and this is something that really was pushed and accelerated, I think, in the last few years. And once again, I mean, if you always look at the problems from a customer standpoint, and the demand has actually changed. I mean, we see that the way that the customers interact with us, that the way that the customers demand different solutions, it has changed, and it's changing radically, almost with all passing years, and of course accelerated by the pandemic. And that was there. I mean, that was there for coming. So once again, I mean, it poses huge opportunities, some challenges, but huge opportunities. I'll just talk about maybe a couple of them. When we were embarking on our, let's say, automation journey, and then the easiest thing to do is to just make a list of all these customer facing processes and go through them and try to automate and everything. What happened was, when we did this kind of, let's say, process audit or whatever you call it within the organization, we found that a huge portion of these processes, a huge portion of these let's say us made things to serve the customers, is actually not serving the customers. And there have been processes that we had to stop. Rather than automate, we just stop this process. There's no need. And there were a lot of processes where there was major rehauling done in order for us to automate these processes. And then we found about 300 odd processes that we should be automating. But the difference that when I hear my other colleagues and the speakers who are actually talking about, is that when you're creating the startup, and you basically are at the liberty of creating the processes that suits your needs and that suits your environment. But then for a company who is there for 25 years, it was like a revamping of all these to really make sure that we stay ahead in the game, we stay ahead of the customer needs, and we are able to serve the market better.
So
So
what
I think
principles do you keep to know what processes to automate and what not to automate right now?
as I said, number one comes from customers. Does this process add value to our end service to the customers, or does it take away from the value, or does it make it more complicated? I mean, principle wise, it has to be a very simple question that you kind of ask. And then of course there are compliance issues and regulatory issues and financial audit issues. We're a publicly listed company with 2 billion plus dollars in terms of revenue. So it has to have a lot of, let's say, legal and compliant processes that needs to be there. But then at the end of the day, I mean, if we are not serving the customers in the best possible and the fastest way ahead of the game, then all these processes are you know not adding up too much value. So that is our number one question, and that is always what we tend to ask in the boardroom: is it adding value to the customers?
All right. Keep the customer at the center of your plans and process. That's a view coming in from Suleiman, especially when we look at automation. Let me get Rick in to understand how the broad dynamics in the region are playing out. Rick, as I mentioned, you have extensive experience in the APAC and Japan region, and you also have an inside view of the evolution of the technology industry here and its applications for a variety of industries. So I want to understand from you, how is this region maturing in terms of automation adoption? What are you hearing from clients across the board? As Suleiman said, they are looking at automation and they look at it from the perspective of customers, whether it's adding value to that interaction. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think all of the guests have made some very interesting points, and I would be remiss not to acknowledge that Grameenphone's business would be very different than a digital natives business, and a lot of legacy. And I think that Suleiman's being spot on with the thoughtfulness in a way that you have to think about how you would approach your business as a traditional legacy vis-a-vis a brand new company. Those are two very different types of approaches to a business. And by no means is Freshworks, as an example, new, but starting with a fresh or clean shade of paper is very different than what Grameenphone is going through. And you're right, we are fortunate to have a front row seat across all industries, either traditional enterprises, public sector agencies, or digital natives. And what I would say is that APJ continues to be a huge growth beacon for UiPath and other organizations that are fortunate enough to be in this region. We're seeing more and more customers, though, take a long-term approach to the way that they're thinking about digital transformation, and as a byproduct of that, automation. And they're not looking at it just from a process or a task-based cost savings. Yes, the cost out is something to take into consideration, but one of the earlier answers, I think maybe that Kartik had mentioned, it's not about replacing an individual. Oftentimes, what we hear from people is, how can you help augment the team that I have? Because there's always this demand for upskilling. For customers are very demanding; they want something right now, as we've heard in this chat. And automation should be an enabler for that, and that's what we're seeing. And we're also talking to them not just about bots. We're talking to them about an entire platform which will enable them to be what we call a fully automated enterprise, and that helps get them further along the path of digitally transforming themselves as an organization. And we see that best-in-class organizations across industry, what we find is that it really doesn't matter the industry, but they're taking a four-pillar approach to have the greatest impact. One, they assign all automatable work to software robots to make back office work invisible, right? So they want to make it as seamless as possible for their employees. They provide a robot for every person in the company. Third, they democratize development so that the power users can quickly build new automations and applications. And finally, where possible, they apply AI to their work in expanding the footprint of automation into cognitive processes to automate more. We had a fireside chat last week with a large organization in India, and they were talking about that fourth point, right? Taking automation to that next step of really cognitive processes to help them automate more. And that's something that I see more and more of organizations doing across the region.
All right, that is the promised land, a more contextual AI driven approach to solving customer issues. But there are always bumps on the road, and the idea now is to figure out how to address those issues. Let me bring in Scott for that. Scott, we've seen businesses rapidly accelerate their automation and digital transformation efforts. And while this has resulted in a greater number of automation initiatives and programs, some companies are still struggling. So I want to understand from you, how does the journey of an enterprise-wide automation look like from your perspective? Because we've discussed in the past some of the issues when we look at, say, automation, where just to log in, say, the employee had to take 7 steps before they actually got to what they did. So how do companies approach enterprise-wide automation from the right perspective?
This is a great topic, and we have this discussion all the time. So it comes back about, how do we start off about automation? And I always want to come back about, what's the automation operating model? How is it set up? How is it actually placed? So if you go back, and there's a great Everest study that talks about 53% of all customers only have 10 bots. And so they're not at automation at scale. And what took place is they started bottoms up. Maybe they started to do their automation, say in finance and accounting, and they did one or two, they did a proof of concept, they did a couple more processes, they set up a center of excellence, and it just stopped. And so they could never scale across an organization because they didn't have the executive sponsorship to do that, or they didn't have the budget. And then we've heard again about selecting the right automations. What are the right processes to automate? So it's a matter of trying to set up this correct kind of AOM model, the automation operating model. So we have an executive sponsorship. It's top down. They have a governance process. They can select the right processes to automate, and they have a budget, and they have a process to actually drive the automation so they get to automation at scale. And we find that many customers that get to that AOM model, that the automation operating model, then they start to grow quite rapidly, and they start to receive tremendous value back. So I think that's something that we all have to kind of look at and understand exactly what we're trying to drive to, and to be able to identify the proper processes that will, one, delight the customers, and two, delight the employees. And so I think this is something that it's a great topic that I often have with these executives, because it's, if you don't know how to do it, you'll never get to automation at scale.
All right, some best practices for tuning your automation operating model. But from where we are to where we need to go, let's extend the conversation towards that direction. Vishal, from a business perspective, what are the trends that you see defining this decade for companies when it comes to deriving more value from data using new technologies like automation and AI? You know, how are cloud and subscription-based models making adoption easier, in your opinion?
The adoption is becoming more so. I mean, at one point of time, it used to be a lot of push based mechanism, that you have to use this, you have to, sort of use this product to achieve the end goals that we have. But today we are seeing a very pull based sort of a system where all the stakeholders are forthrightly coming and saying that, this is what we need, this is the kind of product we need. And when we roll out, whenever we roll out a new product, there's been a bunch of feedback on how more and more features can be added to that product, because overall people are just getting more and more familiar to using, and they see the power of technology in solving some of the chronic issues that they've been having in their operations or the way they manage their operations. So I think the time, I mean, it's far more opportune today to do some of these things, because in general, the mentality or the ability to familiarize and use some of these products has gone up by notches in the last few years, and which is a great positive sign, and it's a great shot in the arm even for the product team when they make some of these products.
And would you attribute the fact that we are now in a sort of a subscription-based paradigm? You think that makes it easier as well? Because, when we look at the cloud subscription-based models, making adoption easier, the impact does seem to be going up.
Absolutely, because with this, it's far easy to calculate the ROI on that investment when it's a subscription-based model. So it definitely helps a lot.
All right, Karthik, coming to you, what will be the digital transformation essentials now for enterprises in this new normal of remote work? Your thoughts on this?
See, I think specifically in the context of customer experience, right from acquisition to activation to engagement to advocacy, right? The customer journeys and designing the customer journeys become extremely critical, and that kind of feeds and informs into a lot of strategy that happens around CX and EX. Right? Customers today expect personalization. They expect omni-channel. They want to talk to and engage with brands or channels that they're comfortable with, right? They want that familiarity. We see line chat and WhatsApp and all these channels gaining prominence. They want asynchronous modes of communication. That's where the messaging first paradigm is coming to existence, right? So from that standpoint, it is extremely critical for organizations to think through customer journeys. And I think a point that Rick alluded to is specifically with respect to some of the older players, for want of a better word, is how do they design because they probably have both physical and digital, right? We talk about the blurring of lines between the two, and we talk about the concept of phygital, right? So the design experiences and their journeys are very different. How do you ensure that the data that you have across the organization and in your ecosystem is used effectively to drive innovation and digitization and bring in the concept of automation to it.
All right. And do you find the role of a technology leader in an organization itself evolving to be much, much more richer than what it is currently?
Absolutely, because and to just borrow from Vishal, right? The aspect of having in a subscription-based economy, right? The entry barriers are lower, the exit barriers are lower, right? But the stakes are extremely high, right? So it keeps me and Rick on our toes, right, with respect to the kind of service and the quality of service that we deliver to our end customers, right? So the role of technology is undoubtedly, undeniably getting critical day by day.
All right, coming to you, Suleiman, you have a startup accelerator program of your own in Bangladesh. So I want to know more about, the startup momentum in Bangladesh and your efforts to grow the movement.
First of all, I think this is a great time to be in Bangladesh, to be in the startup game. And we were, if not the first, at least one of the first accelerator program that we have started in this country. And we did it with the vision, because you have to understand our vision is actually empowering societies, and then we did it from that vision to really empower this ecosystem, because back when we started, this is, I think, our 6th year running. Back when we started, I mean, the scene was still at a very fledgling stage, where I mean, access to both finance and at the same time resources and also knowledge. I mean, everything was kind of limited for the overall startup ecosystems. But what we see, and I will not, attribute it only to ourselves, but in the overall ecosystem, there is a lot of, let's say, attention and a lot of things that are happening. I mean, yes, Grameenphone is already an established business, but then our business, I mean, in a society, if that is stagnant, a business cannot grow. I mean, you have to grow the ecosystem. This is the norm of today, and this is the norm of the future, right? So you have to make sure that you enable the overall ecosystem. You have to enable the overall growth in order for our business to also grow in a sustainable manner. And that was the vision with which we have actually started this game. And I will tell you even this much. I mean, if you consider a company like ours, and this was also when it started as a startup game. It was there to solve a problem for the customers, especially for the village ladies, whereby they had difficulties in access to a lot of the very necessary things, and from there it grew to be such a massive business. But then, what I'm trying to say is that if you take that spirit and then you can inculcate it within the startups, then it kind of has a fantastic, let's say, boom that we see. And this is what we wanted to, let's say, incorporate within this overall ecosystem through technology, finance, and other resources that we could provide ourselves. And I'm happy to see that this scene has really heated up, and a lot of interest from not only local but regional and international investors that is there in the market.
All right. So momentum is picking up speed. So could, Bangladesh be the unicorn destination in, say, 5 to 10 years? I believe there's a projection that Bangladesh could have five unicorns by 2025. What's the momentum looking like right now?
Yeah, it is. I mean, I don't know if you know about bKash, but this mobile financial service, it also started, 8-9 years. I can't exactly tell, but then I mean, with the investments that they have gotten, I mean, you can call them the unicorn, the first unicorn that is there in the market. And we see others also actually following this footstep. And what if you look at forget the startup scene, but even if you just look at the economic indicators, that puts Bangladesh en route to become the hottest, let's say, economic destination that you can have for overall investment and other things. So let's say at a maybe at one point in time, this type of economy was being fueled through, let's say, manufacturing and industrialization and all that. But now it's the startup game. It's this ecosystem that is going to drive the economy forward for the future. And
All
not
right.
only us, we have the attention, but the government also has attention, which is very good to see.
All right, a very confident and optimistic view coming in from Suleiman. This truly is Asia's era of innovation, isn't it, Rick? We are seeing so many B2B, deep tech, IP-driven unicorns. Bangladesh, well, as Suleiman has mentioned, is getting there. The focus has shifted from just manufacturing to new age businesses. India recently became number 3, closely behind USA and China when it comes to, this innovation quotient. And while a lot of these companies, they originate in the region, they're born with a global focus. So, Rick, how do you see automation helping them become global leaders in their business?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful question. I'm very fortunate to have lived out here for the last 18 years. And, first of all, in a blink of an eye, I mean, we have gone from, the vast majority of the population out here not being online to not only being online, but these businesses that end up being born in the cloud, and they really end up leapfrogging a lot of the traditional businesses and industries and being very competitive to disrupt industry because of the enabler of the internet, because of the enabler of cloud, and absolutely, I think, of the enablement of tools and solutions like automation. The pace of technological transformation in Asia is unlike anything else we've seen. In Asia's strength, particularly in digital and mobile technologies, have played a very important role in the region's early response to what we just saw with COVID. And so it's a hotbed of innovation. It's led by new age technologies. And those new age technologies don't just have to come out of brand new companies. They can absolutely come from traditional industries, as we've heard on this talk. And that leads to, faster growing share of investment, IP, and then ultimately wealth creation. As you just mentioned, India is now the number 3 location with the most unicorns in the world behind China. It's leapfrogged ahead of the UK, ahead of France and Germany. And if we would have talked about that 15 years ago, people would have thought we had 2 heads. And so it's amazing to see that acceleration. I think the adoption of new age technologies for businesses has become the expectation now. And it is now finding ways into businesses that are focusing on transformation. And as Scott mentioned earlier, I don't think that any conversation can be had without talking about ESG. And for sustainable success, every business we talk to, whether you're brand new or a long-term company, has an ESG initiative. So technology will help enable that. And to the points that Kartik were making, the focus on the customer, speed, collaboration, resilience, those are going to be key arbiters of who is successful and who's not as we move forward. And I do think automation plays a key part in that entire equation as well.
All right. As we head to the final leg of the conversation, let me get Scott in to respond to what Rick has said. Scott, you have seen technology transformation across categories and industries globally. So can you share some examples of best practices from, say, telecom industry, supply chain, logistics functions? What's the way to go forward as we look to wrap this conversation?
Yes. So this is a huge point, and we're watching technology change so rapidly. And telco is one that we deal with about 200 telcos globally, and we've collected probably 150 best practices use cases that the telcos look at. And just think about all the change in telco in the last few years. They're moving to 5G, Internet of Things continue on, and you start to really realize that the whole environment's changing. And you're also watching different industries kind of collapse down on one another. So we've watched telco with entertainment. So I see a lot of applications now where we're even watching companies time slice 5G capabilities. So if you're going to watch a game or you're going to do some kind of gaming, you can actually take a slice of 5G. Or if you're looking at edge computing for manufacturing, the IoT device with 5G, this is starting to become a real reality. Then finally, you start to look at things like supply chain. I am amazed about what supply chain, how it's kind of evolved over the last 15 or 20 years. When I first started out, we had a thing called the score model, and we did everything in spreadsheets and brains. And now we can model the entire supply chain and bring it up in an AI and an ML model and actually be able to ring it out. And automation's at the center of this. So the changes in technology are monumental, and it's worth hundreds of millions of dollars if we apply the automation correctly across any one of these different industries. So I can see it now in public sector, government, telco, every industry we touch. There's just tremendous amount of value that can be released. So automation at scale is, I think, on our path to the future.
Absolutely. Automation and technology unlocking possibilities for today and tomorrow for all kinds of enterprises. On that note, it's time to conclude our conversation around the power of automation to drive a new era of growth and transform startups to unicorns and turn large established businesses to nimble digital natives. You've been watching our special presentation titled Forbes India Influencers of Change in partnership with UiPath. And I'd like to thank all the panelists for joining us on this talk and sharing their insights. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in. Till next time, this is Gautam Srinivasan signing off.
Forbes India Influencers of Change in partnership with UiPath.